Unless it's not. Where's DDR Mario Mix? Being a video game talker like myself, you tend to get all worked up over random topics in video games. Unfortunately, being a poor video game talker like myself, you don't have a lot of this. Video games can get expensive fast, especially when there's peripherals involved, but it didn't always have to be like that. They used to be even more expensive. Can you imagine going out to one of these arcades? Just a bunch of gamers packed into these little places waiting to play Soul Calibur? But it's too late now, we live in the modern age. Arcades are dead, so there's nothing for me to talk about. Oh well.
Hey, Howdy. What's going on?
Oh, nothing much. Just reminiscing about the good old days.
The 80s?
Yeah, I mean, what a time to be alive, right? Gamers were allowed in public.
They still are.
Yeah, I would give a lot to live in a world like that.
You got it, boss.
Is this what I think it is?
If you think it's an Arby's, then no.
I didn't know you could time travel.
I prefer the phrase. I didn't.
When are we?
I think you mean where? The arcade is located in your state.
Oklahoma?
You live in South Carolina.
It's my state at heart. But this is awesome. Who knew these places still existed?
Anyone who cares?
I care so much.
About as much as I take you seriously.
Wait, how did you do this? Hacking? Yeah, that makes sense.
Arcades! Sometimes it bums me out that they've lived longer than me, but that just means they'll die first. They're already most of the way there. Arcades have been around for a while, earlier than I knew how to count anyways, but they aren't really as prevalent today. I mean, I still see them in anime, but it's really hard to go to an arcade while staying at home like I do.
No arcades here.
But a lot of the video game industry depends on these machines. Early technology wasn't strong enough to play video games reliably in your own home, so people relied on these instead. These giant, monstrous machines that I would love to have one of in my house.
Yes, I would love 30% of this room to be Pac-Man.
Since they were so large, the idea was formed.
Let's make a laundromat!
Coin-op is shorthand for something, I'm sure. Definitely no idea what that means. But these coin-operated machines were the first step towards the end of the human race. Can't have children. They wouldn't understand Dig Dug.
I'm not sure I understand Dig Dug.
Arcades are one of my favorite movie tropes. They always seem like the best place to be aside from inside my own home. So many games and so cheap, they only cost $0.25. At least, that's what they want you to think. Yeah, these games were evil, high-score-based machines trying to convince you to spit as many quarters as you could at them. Many of these games were intentionally difficult. Players would compete to try and get farther than each other or score more points, but the idea was replayability in some form. Simple to understand games made this even worse because why am I failing at Space Invaders? Developers went out of their way to make games where onlookers would think, oh, that seems easy, I could do that, and then BAM! Meet Clyde.
So many early arcade games were like that, too. Pac-Man, Galaga, Asteroids, just small little high-score-based games. For some reason, I've never really been able to get into games like this. Collections are fine from time to time, and I can even play one now and again. But because there's no real sense of progression, it's really hard for me to enjoy the games completely. But as time went on, arcades got more ambitious.
Early titles were as simple as could be, but it wasn't like no games were trying to go further. 1981 saw the release of one of the most world-renowned arcade games of all time. Centipede, Defender, Donkey Kong! While it still had that basis of simple score-based gameplay, it pushed the limits by providing a handful of different stages.
Back in the 80s, video games threatened to disappear forever with the video game crash around 1983. But don't worry, at the forefront of new technology was always Donkey Kong. Those were the days.
But score-based games wouldn't remain the norm forever. Even back in the arcade days, there were some new ideas being brought to life on the way too big screen. A lot of early NES games had their beginnings on arcade cabinets, including competitive games. Eventually developers realized twice the players means twice the quarters. So games like the original Mario Bros. And Street Fighter made their way to arcades to get more and more people playing. The competitive nature of these types of games definitely helped sales, because if you wanted to prove you were better than someone, you just had to pony up and beat them in a game.
I've never been a huge fan of competitive games either, so even if I weren't a few decades too young, I'm not really sure I would have gotten into the craze. Who am I kidding? I'm a nerd. Throw a big dumb ape on a machine and I'm hooked for sure.
But with the NES starting to dominate the markets in the mid-80s and its successor on the way, arcades started to shift gears. After all, the idea always was to provide experiences that couldn't easily be had at home. And so, arcade games started adapting large peripherals, things that wouldn't quite fit inside the average household. Games like Skee-Ball had actually been around since the early 1900s, but with the dawn of consumer electronics, those were the kinds of games that started to have a bigger place in arcades.
But where's Mario?
Arcade machines started to fall out of the standard video game fare pretty quickly after home consoles started to become more commonplace. You'd see games like basketball and those stupid coin drop games, and of course one of my favorite obnoxiously loud machines, Dance Dance Revolution. Ever since my conception, arcade game developers realized it was time to branch out, draw in a different crowd. Real gamers were too busy being stuck at home, so they needed something that would turn out to be a social phenomenon. After all, if you're enjoying it with friends, your friends are more likely to give them money as well. So which social craze did they turn to?
Awkward dancing?
Dance Dance Revolution, or DDR for short, exploded into the arcade scene. I don't think it was possible to ignore these types of games after they got plastered across every mall in America.
Oh god, no!
Rhythm games have always been insanely simple and easy to understand, as long as they weren't made by Nintendo. Press the right button in time with the music, it's a primal instinct given to the first humans by God himself.
Adam, what are you doing?
The snake said it was okay.
Wait, am I Eve?
At this point, arcades had been solidified as a mostly social gathering. Gamers would go, sure, but being mostly in malls, arcades were a place to hang out with your friends on the weekends. Older movies always show people placing quarters on a machine in order to reserve their spot. I tried the same thing, nothing happened. But considering I've been a mixture of antisocial and poor my whole life, anything that turns into a social event generally keeps me away. Of course, it's hard coming up with excuses when your gamer friends ask you to go to an arcade.
I, don't have any knees.
Whoa, what is that?
Do you have any knees?
The Prize Corner, a staple of any arcade, be it in real life or a haunted animatronic VR game. I've spent years of my life wondering about these things, like, who actually cares enough to get the top prizes?
Definitely not me.
Most of the things at prize counters are just silly little toys. One that I was always particularly interested in were those sticky hands that you could flail around. But they were pretty cheaply made, and often wouldn't last more than a couple weeks. It's kind of a clever scheme, too. They rope you in because tickets are the only way to get prizes, but since you're paying for a game, the prizes are allowed to be dirt cheap.
But where's Mario? From that point on, arcades started to find a few more gimmicks to really push sales. You still had your traditional games like competitive fighters and DDR machines, but for the most part what you got were ticket-based games. Skee-Ball may be a historical staple, but a lot of these machines weren't meant to be fun so much as addicting. Short little games that were quick and snappy and meant to suck up a lot of quarters. But arcades have had their foot in the grave longer than I have.
What? It's fun!
So they've constantly been trying to evolve in order to keep customers coming back.
Modern arcades have more of an amusement park feel to them. They're the kind of place that families visit once in a while, bring the small kids, so a lot of games there are flashier. At the same time, ticket-based 5-second games aren't as instantly appealing, they only really draw in people looking for a certain prize. So some longer arcade-style games started to pop up again.
Big developers started to take advantage of this, and now there's a chance when you go to an arcade, you might see a really big name on some of these cabinets. It's not like it used to be, though, where games were built from the ground up just to be arcade games. Now, they tend to take games that already exist and use those IPs to create fun little arcade experiences.
Mario Kart fits the arcades pretty well. Competitive racing, most of these machines just have 2 or more machines next to each other, and if multiple people start playing at the same time, it just throws them all into the same race. But these machines tend to be a little simplistic. I have seen some good ones, but a lot of times the tracks aren't all that interesting. It would be really cool if they decided to butcher an actual Mario Kart and make a cabinet out of it. Playing on a track from Mario Kart 8 Deluxe or even the mobile game would be awesome. But these specific cabinets are kind of meant to appeal to gamers, and chances are if you're a gamer and like Mario Kart, you own Mario Kart. So it makes sense that they use different tracks.
I know usually my habit is to complain, but arcades are such a fun little piece of history that it's really hard to. I may not have ever been a big fan of them, but I would go from time to time, and there's just something about the flashing lights, the crazy sounds, the smell of pizza. No, I'm thinking of a bowling alley. There's just so much going on at these places, and since I never have energy, the energy at the arcade makes me feel like I actually do. If only there was Luigi.
Luigi's Mansion arcade cabinets, these are so cool to me. They're modeled a bit like the shooting games that I haven't gotten to yet. You have a little vacuum accessory and point it at the screen to capture ghosts.
Why is this the closest they've ever gotten to remaking the original GameCube game?
These machines aren't exactly complex. Most shooter-type titles at an arcade are on rails and either short or difficult, meaning you'd have to spend a lot of quarters to get to the end. But it does allow you to play in co-op. I never had any friends, but imagining the game with someone else was always fun.
If only I had a friend.
While we're at it, shooter titles are everywhere at most arcades. One of the ones that comes to mind pretty quickly is the House of the Dead franchise. These games actually got their start on arcade cabinets. These machines use the light gun technology from things like Duck Hunt to shoot at zombies approaching on screen. As I mentioned, these tend to be on rails, and there's not a whole lot of depth to them, but the best ones can be chaotic and fast-paced. Not necessarily hard, but fun to just blast a bunch of enemies using a weapon you're actually holding.
Something about the controls of these arcade experiences is just magical compared to regular gaming. It actually makes you feel like you're a part of the game itself. That was obviously the intent, and it makes sense that arcades have started to move into a new type of gaming, VR. VR gaming isn't exactly new in technology standards, but it is still pretty expensive for the most part, which means that arcades are the perfect place to just try it out if you want to have a good time without spending an arm and a leg on a console you might not even be able to have the room for. I can't fit a Pac-Man. You think I can do a Beat Saber?
I own an HTC Vive, which is at the same time bragging and revealing my stupidity. It cost me twice as much as the Oculus Quest, and since it's so hard to hook up and I move a lot, I just stopped doing it. And since I make embarrassing decisions, I'm the perfect demographic for arcade games like this. These games are actually really cool. VR is a fun time, I always enjoy it, but I can't enjoy it for long. Between motion sickness and my feet not being used to exercise, it can tend to be a bit much pretty quickly. Motion sickness is only really an issue for me when I haven't used VR recently, but it's definitely understandable why this isn't a more common experience. But arcades are perfect because they kind of accidentally solve these problems. Arcade games aren't massive, lengthy adventures. They don't tend to have you move around much, if at all, and definitely don't give you control over it. So arcade VR games just prevent you from moving, which takes motion sickness out of the equation most times. And since they're just short little rounds of fun, you don't tend to have to be on your feet for a long time either.
I'm gushing about an arcade game. What's wrong with me?
To be fair, these are mostly experiences you can have with VR at home, if that's the kind of gamer you are. But there's one other thing that I think arcade VR does better than my Vive: multiplayer.
Yeah, I may not have any friends, but my favorite games are always multiplayer. I'm a complex, deep man with tons of layers.
Ogres have layers.
To be fair, multiplayer isn't always my thing. I don't tend to like playing against other humans because my computer brain doesn't understand the factor of human emotion, or in other words, I suck. But short, arcadey score-style games are perfect for competitive stuff like this. Ultimately, I just need to worry about my own screen, which allows us all to play the game our own way. The game that does this at the arcade that I saw was essentially a Beat Saber ripoff too, and I love rhythm games. But also there are a couple of cooperative experiences too, like a shooter where you work together to fend off hordes of enemies. If I ever have real friends, this is what our first date will be. Friends have dates, right?
So even today, arcades still have loads of fun experiences. It's kind of amazing to me that they've held on as long as they have, considering console gaming becoming more and more commonplace, but I'm really glad they did. I may not be the type of person exactly to love these arcades, but I love gaming in all senses, and the fact that we have these types of experiences means that more people can try out or maybe even enjoy gaming in their own way. But I'm not 100% sure about the continuity of this video, and I think I'm still at the arcade, so be right back.
You have fun? I did, actually. Thanks. It was really weird that these places still existed. It was kind of like a cross between a museum and a tech demo.
I get that a lot.
Oh, you've done this before?
Nope.
Well, can you get us home?
It's right there.
Oh.